Jung believed that what we fail to make conscious, we experience as fate. That means the parts of you you've buried the pain, you avoid the shame, you suppress the desires you censor, don't disappear. They return in disguise, through arguments, through burnout, through the quiet ache of a life that feels like it's missing something essential. While most therapy today focuses on symptoms, Jung went deeper. He wasn't content to treat surface behavior. He sought the source. And in doing so, he unearthed 5 timeless truths about human psychology that remain ignored by most practitioners today. These truths aren't theories. They're mirrors. They show us the masks we wear, the scripts we follow, and the identities we cling to just to feel safe. But what if those very protections are the things holding us back from who we're truly meant to become? Desire. In this video, we'll explore 5 of Carl Jung's most powerful insights into human behavior ideas that go far beyond common self-help advice. You'll learn why people avoid accountability not out of laziness, but out of soul-level exhaustion. Why your daily persona, the mask you wear in public, might be sabotaging your growth. Why true self-love is not indulgent, but vital to your survival. Why most conversations aren't about words at all, but about wounds. And why what we fear most isn't change, but the death of the identity we've mistaken for our true self. These aren't just psychological facts. They are doorways into transformation, and once you see them, you can't unsee them. Jung's teachings don't promise comfort, but they do promise clarity. And in a world flooded with superficial advice, that clarity is a rare form of power. There is a deep psychological truth that rarely surfaces in polite conversation. Most people are not afraid of failure. They are afraid of what failure might reveal about who they are. And so, in moments of discomfort, when reality presses in, when a promise is broken, a goal unmet, or a relationship fractures, our first instinct is not to reflect, but to deflect. We deny, we distract, we blame. But behind this reflexive behavior lies a deeper truth that Carl Jung spent his life uncovering. The avoidance of accountability is not laziness. It is a form of psychic survival. It is the psyche's way of defending a fragile ego, one built not on authenticity, but on scaffolding, on borrowed beliefs, inherited wounds, and the pressure to perform a self we never fully chose. Jung understood that the human soul is not simple. It is layered like an ancient manuscript written in symbols, shadows, and memories. When people avoid responsibility, it's not because they do not care. It's because unconsciously they fear that taking ownership of their actions would unravel their entire sense of self. Imagine for a moment a person who has always been told that love is conditional, that their value is dependent on success, on achievement, on getting things right. Now imagine that person makes a mistake. Deep down, they don't just experience the error, they experience shame. Not just the feeling of I did something wrong, but the crushing belief I am something wrong. So instead of turning toward the pain, they reach for control, self-help books, new habits, rigid routines, toxic positivity, anything that can silence the discomfort without touching the source. They scramble for bandages instead of healing, because healing requires vulnerability. And vulnerability feels like death to an ego that's been conditioned to survive at all costs. Jung warned us that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And today, we see this everywhere, from crash diets to overworking, from spiritual bypassing to compulsive productivity. These are not paths to transformation. They are diversions from it. The unconscious mind does not disappear just because we ignore it. It waits. And what we repress in shadow returns in symptoms, anxiety, addiction, emotional numbness. These are not signs of weakness. They are signals. They whisper something inside you needs attention. And when we don't listen, life raises its voice through burnout breakdowns or crises disguised as awakenings. Herein lies the paradox: the peace we crave lives on the other side of the discomfort we avoid. The very act of turning inward, of saying, "Yes, this is mine to face," begins the journey from fragmentation to wholeness. It is not a call to self-blame, but to self-ownership, not guilt, but growth. Jung's concept of shadow work is central here. The shadow is not evil. It is simply the part of us we have rejected, denied, or disowned. It contains our pain, yes, but also our potential. And when we stop running from it, when we bring it into the light, it no longer controls us from behind the scenes. To avoid accountability is to stay trapped in a loop. To take responsibility, authentic, grounded responsibility, is to step onto the path of individuation, the process of becoming whole. And that process, while uncomfortable, is deeply liberating. Because once we stop hiding from ourselves, we are no longer at the mercy of our defenses. You begin to ask better questions. Not, "How do I fix this quickly?" but "What part of me is asking to be seen?" Not, "Who can I blame?" but "What truth am I ready to face?" This is where real transformation begins. And it's a quiet revolution, not dramatic, not glamorous, but profound. So the next time you find yourself reaching for distraction, pause. Instead of silencing the discomfort, sit with it. Let it speak. It is not your enemy, it is your teacher. And beneath that discomfort, you may just find the first glimpse of your true self, unfiltered, unmasked, and waiting. Because in the end, the strongest people are not the ones who avoid mistakes. They are the ones who are willing to face their inner world without turning away. As Jung might say, they are the ones who stop blaming the world and instead look into the mirror of the soul and whisper, "I am the common denominator." And that's where my power begins. Stay with this journey. The shadow is not to be feared. It is the gateway to wholeness. There is a moment, subtle but unforgettable, that comes for all of us. Perhaps you're in a conversation with a friend or colleague and you say something that feels completely natural to you. But then they pause, eyes narrowing slightly, their body shifting. You see confusion, even judgment. And suddenly you wonder, wait, is that how I really came across? That tension between how we see ourselves and how others perceive us is not a glitch. It's a revelation. Carl Jung gave language to this inner friction. He called it the persona, the social mask we wear to function in the world. Not a lie, not a costume, but a necessary interface between our inner world and the outer one. Without it, we couldn't adapt, connect, or belong. But here is where things get complicated. We are not just the persona, and if we mistake the mask for our true face, we become strangers to ourselves. Most people live unaware that multiple versions of themselves are operating at the same time. Jung identified 3 layers of the self: the person you think you are, the person others believe you are, the person you truly are. Let's start with the first. The person you think you are. This is your internal narrative, the character you've been editing your entire life. It's shaped by memories, culture roles, victories, and wounds. It's part truth and part wishful thinking, a highlight reel polished by desire and fear. You carry this version like armor, a curated identity that tells you, this is me. But is it? Then comes the second layer, the person others believe you are. This version is not yours to control. It's constructed through their projections, their traumas, their past experiences. You could speak with kindness, and someone still hears control. You could act with confidence, and someone still sees arrogance. Why? Because we don't see people as they are. We see them as we are, and they do the same to us. Now let us descend to the third deepest layer, the authentic self. Jung called it the self with a capital S. This is not a mask. It is not reactive or performative. It does not strive to impress or defend. It is the witness behind your thoughts, the silent observer behind the roles. The self is not interested in being liked. It is only interested in being whole. And while it is often hidden, it never disappears. It waits. So many of our modern struggles, burnout, confusion, imposter syndrome arise not because we're broken, but because we've become overly identified with one persona. We become the achiever, the peacemaker, the rebel, the caretaker. And we forget that these roles are only fragments, not the totality of who we are. In this performance, the soul suffocates. Have you ever felt drained after a conversation or strangely guilty after expressing your real thoughts? That sensation is the tension between persona and truth. The cost of this misalignment is subtle but cumulative. We make choices not from freedom, but from obligation. We love from fear. We work to maintain an image. And before long, our lives no longer feel like they belong to us. Jung didn't suggest we discard our personas. That would be naive. He urged us instead to become conscious of them. To ask, which part of me is speaking right now? Is this mask serving my safety, or is it suppressing my growth? Awareness dissolves illusion. Once you see the mask, it loses its grip. And this is not merely a psychological insight, it's a spiritual awakening. The ego wants to preserve the familiar. The self wants to evolve. And between those two forces is where individuation begins, the lifelong process of integrating your inner world with the outer one. Of becoming who you truly are, not by abandoning your personas, but by outgrowing their limitations. You may wonder, how do I know who the real me is? The answer is found in stillness, in those moments when no one is watching, when there's nothing to prove. The real you is not loud, it's steady. It's the one who remains when roles dissolve. It's the quiet presence you return to after disappointment, after success, after you remove the mask and ask, if I stopped pretending, who would I be? This is not a journey of destruction. It is a path of remembrance. The more we witness the masks we wear, the closer we come to the self behind them. And that self, it does not seek applause. It seeks alignment. So ask yourself tonight, when I speak, is it truth or performance? When I act, is it love or survival? And when I look in the mirror, do I see myself or just the reflection of who I thought I needed to become? Because the greatest tragedy is not wearing a mask. It's forgetting you ever had a face beneath it. We live in an era that has packaged self-love into hashtags and highlight reels. It is often framed as a luxury spa days, scented candles, and affirmations echoing in pastel fonts. And while these rituals can be comforting, they are not the foundation of genuine self-love. What most people miss is this: self-love is not an aesthetic. It is a psychological necessity. It is not indulgence. it is survival. Carl Jung did not use the term self-love the way modern culture does, but his entire life's work pointed toward a deeper, richer understanding of it. At the heart of Jungian psychology is a process called individuation, the integration of the unconscious with the conscious, of the shadow with the persona of all fragmented parts into a unified whole. And here's the truth: you cannot integrate what you secretly despise. If you carry shame for who you are, your past, your needs, your sensitivity, your anger, then those rejected aspects do not vanish. They hide. They morph into depression, addiction, projection. Self-love in its most authentic form is the willingness to make space for every part of you. Not just the polished, the pleasing, or the productive, but also the messy, the wild, the scared, and the silent. To love oneself is not narcissism. In fact, narcissism often arises in the absence of true self-acceptance. It is a mask worn by the wounded, a desperate cry for reflection when none was received in childhood. Jung observed this dynamic in the archetype of the wounded child, the part of us that learned early on that approval must be earned, not given. When that child grows up without healing, they continue to seek love externally, often sacrificing authenticity just to be accepted. So what does real self-love look like? It is not loud. It is not public. It is found in the quiet moments where you choose to honor your truth, even when it is inconvenient. It's found in setting a boundary, not to punish others, but to protect your energy. It's saying no when your nervous system screams yes out of fear of rejection. It's choosing rest without apology. It's deciding that you do not need to be understood to be valid. Most importantly, self-love is the decision to stop abandoning yourself. Many people unconsciously outsource their sense of worth. They become addicted to praise, to performance, to being needed. But the moment your worth is based on what you do for others, you become a prisoner to their opinion. Jung taught that transformation begins the moment we withdraw our projections. And that includes the projection that someone else must validate our existence. This is the tragedy of conditional self-worth. We live only as fragments, masks worn for love, and the soul starves. To return to ourselves is not always a beautiful process. Often it is lonely, confusing, even painful, because to love yourself means facing yourself. And the parts you've hidden, the memories you've buried, the emotions you were taught to silence, they do not rise gently. They rise like waves. But this is the work. This is the great task of becoming whole. Self-love is not about treating yourself. It is about confronting yourself. With tenderness, yes, but also with fierce honesty. It is about meeting your shadow, not with judgment, but with curiosity. Not, why am I like this? But, what pain shaped this part of me? And this is where the shift begins. You stop fighting yourself. You stop fixing yourself. And you begin to witness yourself, not as broken, not as flawed, but as human. And from that space, true transformation emerges not by force, but by recognition. Jung believed that we are all born with the potential for wholeness. But most people spend their lives chasing acceptance, never realizing that the only approval that liberates is your own. You must be the one to declare, I am worthy of love, even before I earn it. Even before I change. Even before I am healed. So the next time you feel guilt for choosing yourself, pause. Ask, who taught me that my survival was selfish? Whose voice whispers that your needs are too much your emotions too loud, your presence too heavy. That voice is not the self. That is conditioning, and it can be unlearned. Self-love is not a destination. It is a daily devotion, a returning, a remembering. Not that you are perfect, but that you are whole beneath the wounds. And when you anchor into that truth, the world may still misunderstand you, but you will no longer misunderstand yourself. And in that clarity, you become unshakable. Not because you are invincible, but because you are finally fully, unapologetically you. At first glance, most conversations seem ordinary. Words exchanged, polite smiles, agreements and disagreements moving like chess pieces across the social board. But beneath the surface, something far more primal is unfolding, an invisible dialogue between two nervous systems shaped by unhealed experiences. Jung called this the realm of the unconscious, and in it, every encounter becomes an arena where past wounds seek refuge or recognition. We believe we are communicating as adults. But in reality, most conversations are echoes of childhood. Not the childhood of memories and scrapbooks, but of core wounds, the unspoken fears, unmet needs, and unresolved pain we still carry inside. And unless we become conscious of these inner dynamics, we risk reenacting them with every word we speak. Jung taught that we see others not as they are, but as we are. This is the foundation of projection, the tendency to attribute our disowned feelings or traits to someone else. You say something simple, a question perhaps, "Are you okay?" and it's received not as curiosity but as criticism. The response is defensiveness or silence. Now you feel rejected. And suddenly the conversation isn't about now anymore. It's about every moment in your life when concern was mistaken for control or when silence meant punishment. This is the hidden language of trauma. And it's not spoken with words. It's communicated through tone, posture, micro-expressions, and energy. We don't just hear each other, we feel each other. And the body, unlike the mind, does not lie. If someone's nervous system feels threatened even by a harmless phrase, it will respond with protection, withdrawal, aggression, over-explaining, or shutting down completely. It is here that real misunderstanding begins. Because what feels like disagreement is often unspoken pain. You feel dismissed, but what's actually happening is the other person is overwhelmed. You perceive hostility, but perhaps they are just afraid. You react to their reactivity, and the cycle tightens. Two wounded parts speaking through two adult mouths. Jung believed that emotional maturity begins not with the ability to speak perfectly, but with the ability to see clearly. To pause in the middle of conflict and ask, whose voice am I really hearing? Is it theirs, or the parent who scolded me? Is this my fear, or a story I inherited long ago? These moments of inner reflection are not just helpful, they are transformative. They allow us to disentangle ourselves from the projection web and step into conscious connection. But it requires courage, because listening without defense and speaking without attack means standing naked in your vulnerability. It means choosing presence over performance. Most of us were not taught how to do this. We were taught to win arguments, to be right, to protect ourselves at all costs. And yet the cost of that protection is intimacy. It's real connection. And perhaps even more tragically, the ability to know and be known. To shift this pattern, we must first soften our stance. Jung spoke of shadow integration not as a moral judgment, but as an act of wholeness. When we recognize our defensiveness, our desire to control, our tendency to withdraw, it is not weakness. It is insight. It is a signal that an old part of us is afraid. And when we meet that part with compassion, instead of shame, something remarkable happens. We begin to hear ourselves clearly. From there, we can begin to hear others. And in that space, conversations become sacred again. No longer battlegrounds, but bridges. No longer rehearsed performances, but raw, real, soul-level encounters. We move beyond talking points and into presence. We stop waiting for our turn to speak and begin listening not just to words, but to the heart behind them. This does not mean becoming passive. It means becoming precise, grounded, present. It means learning the difference between reaction and response, between projecting fear and expressing truth, and between defending your ego and opening your soul. This is where healing begins, not through the elimination of conflict, but through the awareness of what that conflict reveals. Every charged conversation is a mirror showing you what is unhealed, what is misunderstood, and what is possible. The more conscious you become of this hidden layer, the more power you gain, not over others, but over the inner forces that once controlled you without your knowledge. So next time a conversation feels off, ask, what's really happening here, beneath the words? And perhaps more importantly, what am I bringing into this dialogue that doesn't belong to the present moment? Because when two people drop their masks and meet without armor, something sacred emerges: true connection. Not the polished kind, but the kind that transforms. And in a world trained to shout your presence, calm, conscious, and curious becomes a revolution. So here we are at the end, and yet if you've truly followed this journey, you already know there are no real endings in the soul, only turning points. And perhaps the most important one is this: the moment you stop trying to fix yourself and instead begin the sacred task of knowing yourself. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But that privilege is not handed to us, it must be claimed. It requires that we look inward, beyond the masks, beyond the noise, beyond the curated identities we present to the world. It requires that we meet the forgotten parts of ourselves with curiosity, not condemnation, and that we allow the shadow not to define us, but to teach us." You've now seen that avoiding accountability is not weakness, it's self-preservation rooted in fear. You've explored how the personas we wear are survival strategies, not lies. You've learned that self-love isn't vanity, it's the fuel that makes transformation possible. And perhaps most powerfully, you've recognized that most conversations are not about facts, but about feeling seen. That underneath the surface, it's often not two people talking, but two histories negotiating safety. And all of this leads to a single truth: your inner world shapes your outer reality. The unconscious isn't some distant mystery, it's active, alive, shaping every choice you make. But here's the gift: once you become conscious of it, you are no longer its prisoner. You become its steward. You take the wheel. True healing, as Jung taught, doesn't come from denying who we've been. It comes from integrating all that we are: the light, the shadow, the wounds, the wisdom. And in that integration, we stop living half-lives and begin walking toward wholeness. This work isn't easy, but it is essential. Because the world doesn't need more perfection, it needs more presence. More people willing to be real, to be awake, to be whole. So if this video spoke to something in you, if you felt seen, if you felt stirred, Don't let it fade into the background of your busy day. Pause. Reflect. Ask yourself, what part of me is ready to come home? And if you're someone who's walking the path of self-discovery, shadow work, and authentic growth, then I invite you to stay connected. Subscribe to my channel, not just for more content, but to join a space committed to depth, not just trends, to truth, not just comfort. Leave a comment below what insight hit you the hardest, which truth challenged you. I read them all, and this is where the real dialogue begins. Until next time, remember the journey inward is not a retreat, it's a revolution. And the more you embrace your truth, the less power the world has to define it for you. You were never meant to be someone else. You were meant to become yourself. Let that be your work. Let that be your legacy.